On December 21st of 1955, while the rest of the nation was preparing for Christmas, there was a group of people calling themselves the Seekers who were standing on top of a hill, and they were preparing for something else. They were preparing for the end of the world. These people were following a prediction by a woman named Marian Keech, who claimed that she had received a message from a deity telling her that the world would be destroyed in a cataclysmic flood on that date at midnight, and that only people who were faithful and believed this message and went up on top of this hill would be saved in a spaceship from certain doom. Miss Keech had accrued quite a following, and these people had given away their life savings, their jobs, their families. They thought this was the end and they'd lost everything for it. Well, when midnight came and went, people were obviously on the edge of despair until Miss Keech came out saying that she'd received another message from the deity, this time saying that the world was saved and spared from destruction because of the faithfulness of these followers. And everyone started celebrating because they realized they'd saved the world. Now, one of these people was not a seeker, and he was a researcher working with a man named Leon Festinger. Festinger and his colleagues were investigating how people reacted when something happened that was inconsistent with what they expected to be true. And Festinger is best known for his theory of cognitive dissonance, which explores this concept of how people deal with inconsistencies. And what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is cognitive dissonance theory. I want to tell you a little bit about the principles and concepts of the theory, as well as the research that's been done to substantiate it, and how this theory really applies to us as communicators and also as Christians. And I have to say, when I first started researching the theory, my question became, is this an actual theory that can be applied to communication, or is it really just for psychology? Is this a practical theory? And my research really surprised me. So Festinger's theory, as I mentioned before, deals with consistencies and inconsistencies. Festinger said that people crave consistency, they desire consistency, and when something happens that's inconsistent with what they hold to be true, they experience an unpleasant emotion called dissonance. And dissonance is like an anxiety or discomfort that arises when something does not meet with what we expect to happen. According to Festinger, each of us carries around a collection of cognitions, which are our knowledge, our beliefs, and our values. And whenever we encounter some element, whether it's a situation or a behavior or a thought, we are very uncomfortable if it's not consistent with what we hold to be true. And Festinger said that we are driven to achieve consonance or consistency. And we can do this in a few different ways. We can do it through changing our behavior, changing our attitude, minimalizing the importance of the element, or even avoiding things that will cause us dissonance in the first place. Now, Festinger was well known for using real-life experiments in his studies. And his most famous experiment was the $1, $20 study. This is where Festinger and his colleagues brought in students, and they had them perform very, very mundane tasks for an hour, turning pegs in holes and emptying and filling small containers with spools. And so obviously no one could consider this interesting. But after the experiment was over, as far as the subjects were concerned, the researchers came up and asked them to go out and lie to people who were waiting in the waiting room and tell them that the research and the experiment was really interesting and exciting, and they really enjoyed it. And some people were offered $20 to do this, and others were offered only $1. But everyone agreed to do it. But what they noticed was that when people came back in and filled out a survey about what they actually thought about the study, the people who were only paid $1 said that they enjoyed the study and found it interesting, as opposed to the people who were paid $20 and stuck with their original analysis that it was boring. Festinger said this is because those people who were only paid $1 had to rationalize and achieve a consonance between the fact that they said one thing, but they really believed another thing. So they changed their attitude towards the element. Another study, of course, is the infiltration of the seekers, as I mentioned earlier, and Festinger writes about that in his book, When Prophecy Fails. There's another concept cognitive dissonance that looks at this experience, and that is post-decisional dissonance. Now, post-decisional dissonance, we've all experienced it. It's when we commit to or buy something, especially if it's expensive, and then we question if we really made a good decision. This was researched at a racetrack in the 1960s when researchers went to people and asked them about their horse's chances of winning. Now, these researchers at the racetrack stood outside of the betting boxes, and they asked people on their way in and on their way out what chances they gave their horse on a 1 to 10 scale, and what they found was that people who had not yet placed their bets actually gave their horse a whole one point difference between the other. So people who had already committed to and put money down on their horse actually changed their attitude toward the horse in that short time so that they would have a more favorable bias towards it and so reduce their own dissonance. And this really does seem to agree with the cognitive dissonance theory that we change our attitudes if we're experiencing dissonance. Also, there is the issue of group loyalty. Festinger said that if someone goes through an embarrassing or difficult, high-effort process to get into a group, they would experience dissonance if they got into that group and didn't find it very good, and so they'll actually change their attitude again to find that group more favorable than they would have if they didn't go through that process. And there was research conducted by a researcher named Aronson where he exposed women to embarrassing situations, asked them to do embarrassing things to join a group, and they did find that the women who did more embarrassing things actually looked at the group more favorably than the women who weren't asked to do embarrassing things. Not everyone agrees with this theory. There are people who say, first of all, that it is not falsifiable because you can't climb into someone's mind and say, this is exactly why they did this. That is an assumption that Festinger has to make at some point. Also, some people say it's not ethical to force people to lie, and others stick to a more behavioralist view where they only believe in looking at the behaviors of people rather than their cognitions. And then there is Aronson, who I mentioned a moment ago. He believes that it's more about a threat to people's self-concept than it is about what they see as far as inconsistencies. So he said it's really the inconsistency between I'm an honest person but I'm telling a lie rather than an inconsistency between this is what I think and this is what I said. It's really more of a self-concept thing and what's a threat to our self. So let's look at this as far as it pertains to communication. We have cognitive dissonance coming at us all the time, whether or not we realize it. I realized this as I started analyzing it, that I'm always seeing cognitive dissonance. If you look at T-Mobile, T-Mobile is always telling you to break free from contracts and not to be trapped. Well, this evokes our cognitive dissonance because we don't want to be trapped in a contract. We don't want to be trapped in anything. And we also don't want to feel stuck. We want to break free, like they say, and so we have to either change our behavior and switch to T-Mobile, or we have to change our attitude and say, well, these are components I like about my current plan, and so I'm okay with being stuck in a contract. Similarly, if you look at Allstate, they say protect what matters most. Well, if your family matters the most, then you're going to say, I love my family, but I don't have Allstate. So then you have to decide, am I going to switch to Allstate or am I okay and feel like we're protected under our current plan? But the idea is to evoke dissonance. Similarly, in politics, if you look at the current administration, they say tax the wealthy to help the poor. Well, if you really care about the poor, but you don't support this particular piece of legislation, then you might feel some dissonance because you might say, I do care about helping the poor, but I don't support this. Finally, as Christians, we need to be aware of cognitive dissonance and how it can help us in our spiritual walk. Paul obviously experienced some dissonance when he says, I am a wretched man. I don't do what I want to do, and I do what I don't want to do. And we also see dissonance when we're living in disobedience. And so, and also if we say we love people, but we don't share Christ with them, this should evoke dissonance in us. But it's important to note the difference between cognitive dissonance and the working of the Holy Spirit and the Lord externally prompting our heart. This is a really useful theory, though, in many fields, and it has been for the last 5 decades.